welcome, welcome everyone. Let's introduce ourselves again.
I'm Ari. I work in Burlington Edison School District, and yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
I'm Katie. I work for the Mount Vernon School District and also excited to be here and to wrap up this book study with you today.
And Tracy Dabbs, also Burlington Edison, very close neighbor to Mount Vernon, our posse of Burlington and Mount Vernon. And of course, our supports with Kristen and Annie. Thank you so much for helping us out with all the tech and setup stuff. But we're excited. Feels like this went by really fast, but this is the last session for Unlearning.
And that picture was us with one of the authors
Oh,
because
yeah.
we were like big fans, right? So
Yep. There's
thanks
Posey
to
right
Kristen.
there.
Yeah, there she is. Yeah.
We got to meet her in person. Crazy.
We were fangirls that day.
We were.
Still are.
Feedback, one of my very favorite things. So of course, every time we ask you to give us feedback, and we have done some changes pretty much every time based on your feedback. So we so appreciate this. But everyone has continued to say they loved the breakout choices. So we really tried to work on some engaging ones this time. Love the structure. So we're keeping a lot of those pieces. We're going to make sure we highlight the website resource that we keep adding to. So we'll make sure we draw your attention to that one again. And
Tracy Katie just dropped that in the chat too, guys. So if you can bookmark it if you haven't already.
Perfect. And we'll keep dropping it too in case you don't see it. And so what we're going to keep is literally everything, because you guys loved it. And we're just going to make sure that you have some stuff for your next steps. And hopefully you'll get a chance to sign up for that next book study, because for me, if I were where you are right now, that would be a perfect next step. So I'm just recommending that as a brilliant next step for you.
All right, so we are actually the end. So theoretically today we should meet these goals, right? Our goals for our book study was to explore the unlearning cycle and reflect on how this process can help us improve our practices, right? So we're going to think about what can we do that's going to make us better. And we're going to dig into those foundational elements of universal design for learning.
Excellent. So today for this session, as Ari had said, this is our last day together. So we're hoping to have some great discussions and some breakout sessions to bring all of this learning or unlearning that we've been doing throughout these last 4 weeks or 8 weeks together, provide some resources and some time to think about next steps and how we are going to be integrating that into our schools and our classrooms and our practice. And then we're going to take some time at the very end just to reflect on our own learning, see what positive things we're going to take with us and where we want to move forward.
All right, you guys ready to dig in? I'm so excited. This is such a great chapter. Chapter 6 is the take action. And one of my favorite chapters, because I'm all about let's do some things. So chapter 6, there are some great pieces, ideas in chapter 6. And so you can see here, it can giving you a chance to actually pick what you want to focus on next is the whole idea behind chapter 6. So we actually restate these several times. So I'm going to blow by this slide so we can actually get into the parts with you. So one of the main pieces, so think about now you've done all this unlearning, and now you got to think about what your next step is. And so there are some recommendations that Posey makes and Novak make for us. So one is to just solidify your beliefs. Okay. And so if you look in your book, there's an activity that they give us on page 66. And this is about really getting those ideas together. And if you go with Katie's going to be, right, Katie, that's you. Katie's going to be looking at this activity number 1. So if you really want to get some of those big ideas down, that's going to be Katie's breakout and this one is about that variability piece. Also in solidifying your beliefs is going back and looking at those goals. And Ari is actually going to be looking at this in her breakout. And this is really near and dear to her heart. So if you are thinking about that one, definitely jump in with her. That is going to be a really good breakout. Okay. Another solidify your beliefs that we're not going to do in a breakout, but we want you to know this is here. On page 78, there's an activity number 8 in the book that really goes through that expert learning piece. And it is a great activity. You will, of course, have access to all of these slides, so you can go and this can trigger some of your memories of what those different next steps are. But activity 8 is a really solid, nice one where you're digging into expert learning goals and thinking about yourself as an expert learner. So if you choose work on your own, you might want to dig into activity number 8 on those choice groups. All right. The next thing after solidifying your beliefs, a next step could also be just to dig more into the framework. Okay. And activity 2, which Katie is also going to do in her breakout group, is to really look at the setup of the framework and how it works. There's a lot to it. It's really meaty. So your next step might be to just kind of dig in and start to get some learning around that framework. I mean, we've been all looking at it for years, and I think we learn a new thing, right, about the framework all the time. Right, Ari? All right. Um, a third thing that they suggest as a next step is that maybe you're actually ready for some lesson reflection or some lesson design based on all the things you've been looking at. So that's the breakout that I'm going to be doing. And there are quite a few activities around this one. Activity 5, 6, and 7 and activity 9 in the book give you these different activities you could do to actually get in and reflect and think about your tried and true techniques and actually think about next steps in your classroom. So that's going to be the breakout that I'm going to be going through. And I don't know if we'll get to all these activities, but I'm going to try to at least show you some resources on how those pieces would work, to at least give you some tools that you could use. All right. I tried to be quick, Ari.
So we're going to learn and work a little bit today and just looking at the UDL framework. And I don't know about you, but when I first started looking at the UDL framework, I was like, wow, that's a lot. So we're going to watch a short video today, which I couldn't do any better way of explaining on how to use the UDL framework, and then look at a few different examples and how people have used it with their students and help us learn how the organization of that UDL framework can help you with your lesson design. So as you look at it, when I first began working with UDL, I start typical, I read vertically and then I read horizontally. So I wasn't exactly sure the best way of which to approach this framework and where I needed to be in that. We're going to watch just a short video from someone from CAST explaining exactly how to work and read the UDL guidelines and structure.
The guidelines. Typically, and in the video that you'll be seeing, we tend to go vertically, talking about perception, then language and symbols, and then comprehension. And it has a feeling of inching your way through the guidelines, through the checkpoints. But I want to talk a little bit more globally, which is to say that actually the goal of UDL is along this horizontal, the bottom of the table here, options for comprehension, for executive functions, and self-regulation. That this is where we want to end up. This is where we want kids to be. That is, that they comprehend whatever's in front of them. They have good strategies. They know what to do. Similarly, they have great executive function. They make good plans, set goals for themselves that are appropriate, and monitor their progress. And lastly, similarly in engagement, the affective domain, that they are, in fact, able to self-regulate. It's not that they have to be stimulated by the outside world, that they're in charge of how things interest them and what they engage in and what they're willing to put effort in. So this is the place we want to get to. And the other guidelines are, in fact, really part of getting there. We do need to make sure that everybody can perceive the world from which they're going to learn. And whatever is put in language and symbols, we need that to be interpretable by the individuals. But it's really to get to comprehension that we want to do that. And similarly, we certainly want every child to be able to act on the world and to be able to be skillful in things like communication, to be able to write and speak and so on and so forth. But the top of this is really to get to executive functions where they can plan a good essay or a good speech, make it, deliver it, monitor their progress, and so on. So it's to get to executive functions that these others are critical. And lastly, on multiple means of engagement, at the beginning, it's how do we recruit interest? But that's too external. We move a little higher when we say, how do the kids learn to sustain engagement and persist in spite of difficulties? But the top of that hierarchy is really, how do kids set good goals, personal goals about development for themselves. How do they cope? And how do they reflect on their own development and their own engagement? So when you think about the guidelines, certainly there are three main principles, and there's a verticality that goes literally from the outside in. So these are things that have to do with perception on the outside. These things have to do with physical action on the outside. Things to do with how we engage from the outside. But as you move down to this final row, it's all about the kids themselves. It's internal. The kid is what's driving. So what we want to do is get to that. Students who are independent, self-directed, self-actualizing learners. So in an odd way, the guidelines go outside in. Each of them do that. And here's where we want to end up. Thanks.
And I just wanted to share that with you because for me, that was a big aha moment. And it really made me think about, I always thought about, okay, I need to start here and work my way down before I can move over to the next column. When really, when we're thinking about from the outside, so these are the things that the teachers can do. These are the things that the teachers can control. And we want to continue to build upon that. And this framework helps us build upon that to where students become expert learners, where students have that agency and where they can be in control of some of their own learning. And so to start this process, in chapter 6, they gave us a couple different examples. And so if you look at activity 2, which is on page 67, it starts on 67 in your book, and it talks about digging into the language of the principles and teaching kids about how they can become expert learners in your classroom. I will tell you, as a middle school teacher, if I gave that to my kids, they'd look at me and they'd put it aside and be like, Mister, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. But how can you then work with your students so that they can understand some of that language? And so here's just a quick example of what a teacher did to say, okay, what is universal design for learning and why is it important? And putting it into more simplified kid-friendly language so that they can access and understand what we talk about when we talk about the multiple means of engagement. What do we talk about when we say multiple means of representation? So we can put the pictures and the pictures and the vocabulary together in a kid-friendly language so that they can see where themselves are within that UDL framework. The second activity that Allison and Katie proposed was activity number 1, and that was on page 66. And so if you look on page 66, you can see that is where they encourage you to have students do some self-reflection and self-identifying of where do they fall in that learner variability. Where do they fall? When do they see where they have strengths? When do they see where they have weaknesses? And as we know with learner variability, that's going to depend on the context. That's going to depend on the environment. That's going to depend on the day. But to have kids do some looking at what their learning profile looks like and how that impacts them could also be a very important learning experience that they can engage in to say, well, in science, I feel that these are my strengths and this is what I can do really well. In English language arts, these are my strengths and this is what I do very well. And understanding that there's variability in their learning depending on what the different context is, and being able to, and also their cognitive load, and just knowing where they're at the beginning of the day. So that was activity number 1, referenced on page 66. And as you look at that, and as I looked at that as well, I would also go through the examples that they give, look at learners evaluating themselves on their interest, persistence, self-regulation, perception, language and symbols comprehension. I would also work with my kids on the language around that, because as my middle school students would say, I don't understand what that means, Mister. So working with kids to identify how can we make that kid friendly to where they can understand where they fit and what their learner variability is within different contexts and within different environments. Here are some implementation tips that I found helpful as a teacher when I was going through and trying to plan a lesson. And so as you're planning, and you can't do everything. And that's the one thing that Katie and Allison do say in this book: pick one and try to do really well at one. And as you move forward. And so here's just some implementation tips, depending on where you fall within your progression and what you're really focusing on, of how you can provide different information for kids, or how you can provide different information for kids according to the variability of the learners that are in your classroom. So I encourage you to save that and come back to this as you can. And so for the rest of our time, I wanted you to take about 5 minutes to explore the CAST website about the UDL guidelines. Pick one of the guidelines you would like to explore further and dig a little bit deeper into the resources available. And then we'll come back together after that 5 minutes and be ready to share one thing that you learned during that implementation or during that exploration. And whether that's if you're working with staff or whether you're working with students. So as you follow that link, and I can drop it in the chat here. You'll find the UDL guidelines. They have great resources to tell you a little bit more about UDL, as well as and how it relates to their equity initiative. But then this is an interactive framework where you can click on each one of these and get some additional information on how you can incorporate this into your classroom. So for me, if I was really interested in fostering collaboration and community, it gives me some advice and some examples of how I can help create that in my classroom. So I'd like you to take about 5 minutes to look at this interactive, find what you really want your students to know and be able to do. For me, I always struggled a little bit with having students being able to set appropriate goals and do some goal setting for themselves and really reflect on where they are as learners. So I might go and explore some of this executive functioning, but pick a place where you feel that is a good entry point for you. Explore some of these interactive activities, and then we're going to come back and share one of the things that you learned. And something that you might want to move forward with in your next steps. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. And we've just got about 2 more minutes. The 20 minutes goes so fast together. So do we have anyone who'd like to share something that you looked at, something that maybe stuck with you, something that you think that you could implement tomorrow or next week with either a group of staff or a group of students that you work with?
What I'd like to do is pull this whole chart into a staff meeting. We're an AVID school, and so we discuss AVID strategies quite a bit. And I did sort of get together with one of the AVID committee members and mention that maybe we want to introduce more UDL. So we're gonna work on sneaking it in there a bit more. But I would love to take the whole graphic and just paste it up there and go, okay, guys, this is what we got to do. And that's probably largely because I do SPED. And so we use a lot of these things anyway. And getting a lot more of that to be used in gen ed classrooms would be amazing.
Excellent. And there's a lot of crosswalks between UDL and AVID strategies as well. And they're into scaffold and support for student learning. So there are some great resources between the two. And thank you. Rebecca says they're going to try goal setting with their students based on their MAP scores to get student buy-in to test. That is huge. And that is something that we've really been working on, particularly in our high schools, because they take their assessments within their advisory classes. So oftentimes that goal setting and knowing where they're at and setting a goal for themselves really makes it meaningful for kids. And we find that they try that much harder.
I looked into the collaboration with groups because I've got a teacher that had said, oh, I've tried group work and it doesn't work. I'm also a special ed teacher, so inclusion wise, and setting up the norms and teaching them how to ask help and talk to people is probably huge too, that to improve on that.
Excellent. Absolutely.
So I know usually I'm the one that is in like this weird spot for where I teach, because I don't teach in a actual like public school or private school setting. There's not like gen ed kids around me. I teach for a mental health day treatment program. And so I was looking through some of the engagement pieces, seeing is there anything I'm missing, you know, to help keep my kids engaged in the learning. And it was a little affirming for me, really looking at like, these are things that we talk about, you know, all the time with our students. It was talking about, you know, the coping strategies and skills. And I was like, yes, my students are not allowed to say in the classroom, I can't do that. You know, we talked about our growth mindset. Well, I just can't do it yet. I need to work on that. So it was very like, oh, okay. I know where I'm at with this. I'm good. I've got that part down. I'm not missing a piece. Just going to keep going with it.
Excellent. Thank you.
I had just put in the chat that that's an awesome way also to introduce the framework to teachers, because if you ask what's on here that you see that you're already doing, they can build on that, but feel that it's not, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. I have so much to do, but see, I'm actually doing some of these strategies now. What's maybe one more thing I could introduce?
Mm-hmm.
And I really like how she iterates in this chapters, you know, pick one thing to tweak and pick one thing to do differently. You don't take it all at once, because I think when the framework is presented as a whole, it can be overwhelming to staff and they think they need to overhaul it. But as you start talking and as you start learning and reflecting upon your own practice, that they find that there's a lot of things that they're already doing.
Let's jump right to room number 2 with solidifying beliefs. Ari, who from your group wants to share out?
We looked at, and it's actually on the resource bank for those that weren't in the group, the detangling. So just breaking that down on, I don't know if others are like me, but I teach multiple subjects a day. I teach 6 different things a day in secondary. And so not remembering I don't have to do every single one, but just starting with maybe one class period and figuring out how to break that big unit, like we're doing adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing decimals right now. How do I break that down to smaller chunks of goals to work on for students? So
Figuring out the goals is so important because it basically tells you your next step, right? Because if it's a content goal, you get to focus on choice with students. If it's a process goal, you're focusing on scaffolding and support. So I love that one, Ari, and you always do such a great job discussing around that one.
I just think it makes a huge difference in our classroom, right? When we stop and think about that, so many
100%.
years I taught and went, you know, I just did it because I was trying to get them excited about it. I was really excited about my lesson and it was awesome. But maybe I wasn't grading them, especially grading. I was grading them on things that weren't necessarily the goal. I've
Hey,
learned.
it's all a learning
right?
process. All right. Well, I had an amazing conversation. Vicki and I were together talking about lesson reflection and design. Vicki, what did we talk about?
We talked about the steps of the design cycle and how important they were. And we also looked at ways to collaborate. It was the one that you could collaborate for 5 minutes or 15 minutes, or where you could really talk about the essential things of defining the goals. And I was excited about all the resources.
And Vicki's doing some amazing things with some students and some credit recovery, right? Some of our students that might feel like I am just not ever going to be an expert learner. And so what an amazing opportunity to share things like this and turn things around for some of those students. And it sounds like your science activity of hands-on amazingness. So I'm just inspired and so happy that those students get to be with you, because the things you're doing sound amazing, and just the executive function focus you're doing. But here's that protocol that Vicki was talking about. And this is Posey's from the author of our book. And so you think about how much time you have to collaborate, whether it's 5, 15, or 45, and you click in here and it gives you these wonderful guiding questions of what to talk about with your lesson, what to focus on. Just like Ari was saying, it was about the most essential content or the essential goals, and then how to really think about your instruction. There's a great video showing teachers actually doing this process together. There's a downloadable template. My high school crew has done this in about 3 rounds so far. We just did another one this morning and they are loving this. So if you are looking for a protocol to collaborate, that supports it. This is awesome. And I also love that maybe I don't have time to work with anyone else, but I just have some questions to support myself for a couple of minutes. These are just really grounding questions. And that 5-minute conversation, you can do some things even in a 5-minute conversation. So Vicki, thank you so much. That was such a fun conversation with you. That was wonderful.
Excellent.
Katie.
Yes. In our group, we went over, it's in Appendix B, and looking at just the overall UDL framework. And through there, we watched that short video that talked about how to read the guidelines, because I'll be honest with you, that was a game changer for me, and that I wanted to read them this way rather than read them this way. And so learning how we can go from external factors into internal factors and how we want to create that student agency in our classroom. And so I think when given the framework, sometimes it's a little overwhelming and people can get overwhelmed. And so Rachel, if you would be willing, you had a great message in our chat talking about bringing the guidelines back to your building. Would you mind sharing what you had said in that chat? Because I think it's a great place to start.
Yeah, it's a little noisy back here, but I'll give it a go. We were just talking about how I work in the teaching and learning department. And so we took the guidelines back to all our building administrators during their monthly admin meetings, and the guidelines were just far too much and we could tell they were overwhelmed. And so as a TNL team, we decided to focus on the access part of engagement and use that as something for our district to focus on for the year, so that all teachers are clear as that's what we're doing. And so when we provide presentations to our building admin, we focus on giving them options with the individual choice and autonomy, which is part of that access piece in engagement. And so we give them those choices for their own learning, so they can internalize that experience to bring back to their staff in buildings.
And I think it's so important to see, and I love hearing that you are leading some of the discussions about UDL in a UDL format. And I think that modeling is so important for a lot of our instructors, our teachers, our staff, just to see that it's not this big, huge thing where you have to check off every single box, but being able to do that and lead and model that in your meetings, I think is very valuable.
So glad you mentioned that. Modeling, sharing these things at that leadership level and having this modeled in your staff meetings, any PD that you do. I mean, I think that is so key for people to see and experience it.
And that's our next slide, Tracy. Let's rotate that, because we are already at 45, so we're running as normal and behind on time. But let's one more slide, I think.
You're right. It's one more. So a section in the book that we didn't cover was the moving your whole system forward, right? And remember, your system can just be your school. Maybe it's your department, right? And then all the way to your whole district. So think about those moves that you can do, right? I love their section, It's Personal, on page 82. Katie or Ari, do you want to say anything about that section? It's pretty moving if you haven't read that.
You go for it. I feel like you feel moved.
This one, if you look at this, it does become personal. I mean, it does. It's like you can't unlearn it after you've learned. Well, it's unlearning. You can't unlearn it after you've learned it. It's like it becomes like part of your soul. And so you'll just see it around, right? You'll just be in the grocery store and you're like, oh, there should be better access to that. There should be, oh, why are we not doing this for other people? You're going to start seeing it everywhere, and you're going to get really ticked off at some of the things you're seeing that we could easily change that we haven't. And so if you haven't been moved yet, I guarantee you will. If you stick with this long enough, you're just going to see things that it would be unethical for us not to, is basically what you get to. And so I hope it becomes that emotional for you, because I think our students really deserve it. They really do. So read that section, please. It does. We have a lot of people on staff, Ari and Katie, that I get to work with. It becomes this just mantra and just feeling that you have to just share with everyone. I don't know, Katie or Ari, if either of you want to talk about when they talked about the salesperson, the maven, and the connector. That was an interesting section.
I'm probably, well, I unless Katie, you have something you want to just pull out of that. I think you just mentioned that it's an important one. I think my bigger piece with this about moving our system, right? It takes time. Tracy and I have been talking about this for 5+ years, right? We are just getting to where we're seeing every building starting to look at this at a different level. And we've done it from where we could control it with our tech pieces. Then we went to where can we control it with our teaching and learning, and right? So where can you spread the message? And sometimes the message is just like with your partner or a colleague, right? All those little sparks lead to a fire. And so the idea of whatever your platforms can be, and giving those examples and sharing as you're learning too, and being vulnerable so that you can learn together with others.
And please know, you don't have to be an admin to be a leader. Some of our very best leaders are in the classroom, in the field, just sharing the work.
Oh,
Rachel,
yeah.
sharing the work and being those people that are 3 years now with my high school, and just hearing some of the stories in our meeting this morning where it was like, oh, I got teary-eyed, right? That kid that no one could reach is now this reachable kid, right? It's just because we opened up some things. So, gosh, I hope that
I've been carrying around the UDL, the UDL Now book. I mean, I did a thing with it with Kristen years ago too. I mean, I've been like carrying that book around for like 10+ years, right? Until someone would listen.
Yeah. So,
and all I have to say is it takes a team. And I tell Tracy and Ari all the time that I'm super jealous that they get to work together. But you know, I'm kind of on my own, but I've developed my team, and I found those leaders within the building, and I found our teacher leaders within the building, and some of those early adopters who are coming on. And it's amazing how when you get teachers on board, you start to get other teachers who are like, that's really cool. How can I do what they do? Oh, well, how did they get that kid to read that book? I couldn't get that kid. Well, let me come in and tell you. Let's work together. So it does sometimes take that ground up approach, but you know, the collaborative piece is amazing, and the storytelling is amazing when you start to hear about the work that's being done.
Yes. So somewhere in your next steps, think about how you can just keep moving everyone around you forward. All right, and we're over here to the side, and we have a next steps section for you. And it can be, Ari had a great point. It could be more things. It could be things that are resonating with you, maybe some questions you want to tackle, but you can get your next steps in there. I also want to draw you back to, there was a question last time of how to help students make good fit choices. We did put a link in here with some engagement resources around choices. So if anybody wants to take a peek at that, we did promise that we were going to dig and make sure we had resources around good fit choices. We have other things too. I need to add more to that site because we had some teachers with some great reflection scaffolds that after you made a choice, how'd you know it was a good one? So there's a lot around that one. But let's get some next step comments in there. I think I need to, make sure I refresh my page. I'm curious to see what people are picking for their next steps. Oh, that's a great one. Share some things at staff meetings. I know there are some principals that actually have like a spotlight sharing at the beginning of every single staff meeting where teachers can share quick resources. See if you can get your leadership to do that. That's a great one. Or there was a great one at our high school where they had a bulletin board. It was the pineapple board where people shared, you could come into my room and check things out, and here's a thing I'm doing. Want to continue bringing back this learning to my team. Nice.
I'm hoping to work with some people off this list that are going to send me some things that with like Michelle, we're going to collaborate. I didn't type it on the
Awesome.